Morning, everyone. My name is Nitin Pansari. I head Affordability for PayU India. We'll be hosting a series of sessions on affordability, and today is our first session. So I welcome you all. Today, I have with me a very special guest. He has a little unusual experience, diversified experience. He has worked in multiple sectors in his 17 years of professional career, starting from hospitality to telecom to banking. He is currently serving as the head of digital partnerships for ICICI Bank, of which he was also the founding team member. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Gaurav Kocher for the first fireside chat session. Welcome, Gaurav. Pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Nitin. Very excited for this conversation.
Great. So, today's session will be about buy now, pay later, which is the most hottest payment topic in India today. Now, Gaurav, BNPL grew by around 500% in 2021. As per a report, the e-commerce transactions contribution, the BNPL contribution to e-commerce transactions will be approximately 14% by 2026, and it will contribute to around $50 billion in GMV. That's a huge number, right? But before we get into what is leading to the adoption, let's understand what really is BNPL. So, my first question to you is, what is BNPL and how is it different from a traditional credit card payment product?
Sure. So, see, before I begin, a little bit of context, just to put this in perspective on BNPL and how will it act as a differentiator. Very recently I went through a very interesting study that suggests that an average merchant site witnesses that every 4 in 5 visitors abandon their cart before making a purchase. Of these four, only one is likely to come back later to complete the purchase, while the other three purchase from somewhere else. Now we
Okay.
can blame it to the unintegrated and unconvincing visuals in user experience or lack of effective drip campaigns to lure these buyers. But in addition, there are two critical factors that work against the willingness of the customer to buy. Even if you were to keep that aside, most important is a suboptimal, if not broken, point of sale user experience, and that's the major spoiler. So, if I may say, all the journey mapping, countless hours of innovation, ingenious marketing and lead generation, and even the best recommendation engines on merchant platform would eventually fall under the sword of payment experience. Now, coming to what is BNPL? Uh, BNPL, Buy Now Pay Later, as it's known for, is a revolutionary payment option that has trailblazed into our lives. And the reason behind it is its ease of credit access and a super
Right.
smooth payment checkout experience. It
Okay.
actually addresses the need of making credit access easy to the worthy user segment. Buy now, pay later is nothing but a short term micro digital credit model where consumers have to pay little to no interest for online or offline purchases. Today, it's available and getting used across marketplaces of all categories and even with offline merchants. Broadly, it's visible in two different avatars, or I can say two specific categories, and let me try and briefly touch upon both of them. The first category is a deferred payment model, wherein the customer has to repay the amount within a 7 to 30 days of credit period, as offered by different issuers. This version has emerged as a winner for high frequency and low ticket size products and is pegged as a proposition of convenience for the users and a frictionless checkout experience by the merchant for the user. It's working really well for essential categories like grocery, food, hyperlocal delivery businesses, or even mobility options like Ola, Uber, etc. The second version, interestingly, is a regular EMI model with a tenure of few months. This may or may not be a zero cost model. An example of this could be a high ticket category like travel, electronics, furniture, education, and so on. In nutshell, BNPL is a digital consumer finance offering created within the RBI's regulatory guardrails, quite like all other lending products, with both free credit period and EMI repayment options.
But isn't that same as credit card? I mean, a normal credit card also is free credit for the customer, right? I mean, you can, depending on when you purchase, you can take a free credit up to 45 days, right? So, what is it that really separates a BNPL product from a traditional credit card?
So two things, Nitin, if I may, specify. One is the ease of access of credit.
Okay.
The second is, of course, because really, there are different ways banks and non-banking players globally and in India today are underwriting users for a digital credit option like BNPL. It could be completely digital lending on the fly. It could be underwriting on the fly. It could be a user who's already pre-approved is able to discover the option on the fly on a merchant point of sale. Should be able to onboard it and then should be able to transact seamlessly. So I think what sets it apart is the ease of access of credit, the ease of discovery on a merchant checkout page, and the super efficient transaction experience. I think these are the two things which distinguish and set this payment instrument, or I would say affordability based payment instrument, as a differentiator from the conventional card products.
Okay, great. So you touched upon, there are a lot of Western players in the market, right? Both Western markets as well as Indian market. So I want to ask something on that, right? BNPL, as far as I understand, is a product which was adopted very well in the West, right? In the US, in European market, and even in Australia, right? It's a trend which is catching up in India. So can you throw some light on what are the global trends that we are seeing in these countries? Who are the key players? What are the market size? And then bring it back to India. Who are the key players? When we talk about banking versus fintechs, how is it slated to grow in India over the course of next 3 to 4 years?
Sure. So to begin with, let me try and share some numbers on global e-commerce growth rate. And then let me try and bring the BNPL trends in two ways. One, we can look at it from a share of total digital payments transaction value in India. And the other could be as a share of e-commerce spends in India. And broad numbers on how do we see this moving further. Starting with e-commerce, trends, I think 2021 witnessed strong global e-commerce growth of roughly 14% year on year, as per the global economy. And specifically, travel as a sector in particular began to recover from the early headwinds and impacts of COVID-19. This helped this whole sector of e-commerce exceed to about $5.5 trillion in transaction value. Interestingly, the share of mobile commerce also in the year 2021 exceeded that of desktop e-commerce, with transaction value for mobile devices peaking at 52% of all e-com spends. Now, these global e-commerce spends are pegged to grow at a 12% combined annualized gross returns through 2025 when it will surpass over $8.5 trillion. Coming
Okay,
to BNPL, I think it's proliferating globally, accounting for about
right.
3% of global e-com transaction value in 21 and projecting to about 5.5% by 2025. Coming to the key players globally, BNPL is led by Klarna, which is a
Right.
Swedish-based bank. Afterpay, an Australian-based Australia company, which has recently
Yeah.
been acquired by Square. PayPal, which we all know, needs no introduction. With a lot of challengers like Zip, Sezzle, and a dozens of smaller local competitors
Right.
emerging to compete for this fast-growing payment segment. Another important stat, Nitin, is that globally 19% of consumers in the year 2021 were reported to use installment plans as payment methods. And this is a very big testimonial of the fact that BNPL as a category is going to see substantial growth in the forthcoming years because this number is slated to grow as per a World Pay report to 50% in the next couple of years. The
Oh,
percentages obviously are high in the millennial segment with Gen Z and Gen Y, but the fact that this number is growing at such grand pace, this has moved by the way from 6% in 2016 to 19-20% in 2021. At the pace that this number is growing, it is going to be substantial, for how BNPL can ramp up the affordability segment product range in our country over the next few years.
okay. That's very interesting. But tell me one thing. In the Western market, the credit card EMI penetration is actually very high, right? As opposed to India, where the credit penetration was only around 3 to 4%. In US, the credit card penetration is already above 60 to 70%. But yet, we have seen that BNPL has been adopted has taken up really well, right? In India, where the adoption is only 3%, where the penetration is only 3%, do you see that as opposed to Western markets in India, it is a payment method which is just waiting to explode, right? I mean, in similar lines to what we saw in case of UPI when it came in 2016, and then from 2017 onwards, it has seen exponential growth, right? Do you see the same thing happening in India for BNPL?
Well, that's an interesting bit to touch upon, but uh, the first and the foremost thing, I think credit is very different as a standalone mode of payment compared to payments. While most of the time we end up comparing it with the digital payment scope and how it has grown and ramped up. You just gave an example of UPI there. I think one of the fundamental things is that uh, the way it has got very little to do with the fact that India only has about 55, 56 million credit cards. Affordability or credit enablement has been a challenge for an economy of our size.
Right,
And the fact of the matter is that today, how do you push the envelope? The million dollar question is that beyond the existing credit enabled users, how do you push the envelope further in terms of bringing more and more Indian nationals into the formal lending economy? That has been the fundamental question. While the reason why the industry today is so convinced about BNPL as a credit enablement method is for two reasons. One, the ticket size of credit that we look at here is far smaller than any other conventional mode of credit. Number
right,
two, there is far larger acceptability among conventionally large banks as well as non banks today to lend to new to credit users who do not have any bureau footprint, who have not sought any sort of lending in the past. Historical trends are not visible for them, but based on their banking and other enablement which are being done by, for example, other account aggregator is going to be a stepping stone in that direction. With accessibility to user financial data, it will become far more easier and accessible for banks and non-banking entities to be able to lend to new to credit users with confidence. And I think that's where I said in the beginning that not just a great payment experience, it's of course very important, but also discovery and access to credit
right,
will become far easier. And
right.
that is where we see a lot of value in BNPL as a product category.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now, what I really want to understand, Gaurav, is what are the key drivers, right, which are leading to the adoption? And again, as I said, and you've also said that the adoption is just waiting to happen, right? I mean, if we are at the nascent stage, it is a product which is waiting to explode. But what are the key drivers that you think will lead to the adoption and scale in India?
Sure. So just before we get to the key drivers, maybe we could briefly, maybe I would like to briefly touch upon the BNPL numbers in India,
Sure.
and of
Yeah.
course, how do we see that growing further?
Sure.
So if you look at the digital payments and the pace of growth that digital payments has delivered, and we all have witnessed in the last 5 years, is obviously no more a secret. It has moved from a US dollar 61 billion in 2016 to over 300 billion in FY21. And given this increasing online purchases and digital adoption, this is expected to grow to $1 trillion by financial year 26. And this is essentially 30% of India's consumption GDP. This
Wow.
is a very interesting number to look at.
Right.
If you proportionately look at affordability products like BNPL or EMIs, they represent just 5 to 6% of the digital payments as on today,
Right.
which is about $20 billion. However, this is expected to jump 5x to about 100 billion dollars by FY26, which will be roughly estimated to be about 10% of the penetration of digital payments.
Correct.
Now, this is a very interesting data, and if you look at, we have enough and more examples globally to be able to see, economies like there are enough and more European economies who are already contributing to over 7% of e-commerce numbers through BNPL. And there are within Europe there are some developed economies who have crossed 10% penetration on e-commerce numbers. So So it's a very, very interesting data for us to know that how do Indians pay today in the online and offline point of sale today, and what is the penetration that we see of BNPL, for us to know what is the headroom for us to grow. But before
So
that,
just touching on that question, Gaurav. So who are the key players that are there in India? So you spoke about bank versus non-banks. So who are the key players that are there in the ecosystem today? And a follow-up question would be, do you see the Western players, right? You named a few like Klarna, Afterpay, Sezzle, etc. Do you see those guys also entering, given their expertise, entering the Indian market and leading to that growth of BNPL in India?
well, the latter is very difficult for me to say. They haven't really made any formal announcements so far.
Yes,
But coming to the key players in India, of course, among banks, it is Pay Later by ICICI and HDFC Bank FlexiPay, and non-banks, there's a Simple, there's LazyPay, and a bunch of others. I think, I would still say that, from a issuer perspective, there is substantial user base which is already pre-approved for
right,
a BNPL in India. It is only a function of how well can we make the entire ecosystem aware of what's in it for them, what are the benefits, what are the frictions that they feel. If we can answer them, I think literacy and awareness is going to be a stepping stone in driving adoption and scale on this product category. But I think another very interesting thing that I was touching upon was that it'll also be very interesting for all of us to sort of experience that how do Indians pay today in the online and offline point of sale. And it, we all know that cash has been one of the driving forces of our economy. And in a lot of meetings, you would have heard saying that the elephant in the room is cash. We don't really know how
right,
to handle it,
right,
right? Through various initiatives of the government, they've tried to manage cash as long as possible, but we have had our challenges. Interestingly, if you look at some data, the cash at POS has dramatically declined, for India from pre-COVID to post-COVID. Pre-COVID, this number used to be in the range of 70%, where at post-COVID, it has come down to about 35 to 40%. And in the offline world, cards and UPI and digital wallets still dominate the offline market with share of 32 and 22% respectively. However, what is even more interesting to know is that finance, online financing, which could be BNPL or EMI based products on BNPL, is only 6% of the offline sales today.
okay,
And in the online segment, on the other hand, while the use of cash is much lower, post COVID has come down to as low as 8%.
right.
Interestingly, India is still ahead of the global average in the usage of BNPL in the online segment, which is what we refer to as e-commerce purchases, where we are already at 3% versus a global average of 2.1%. So
Right. So I think that is one very interesting topic that you've touched upon. We were reading some numbers. So there are a lot of players in the ecosystem. Like there is Sezzle, there is Simple, there are banks, who have come up in the BNPL space. HDFC, ICICI obviously are there. Then there are players like Simple, Sezzle, LazyPay, etc. Right? The overall combined base of this entire ecosystem is already touched greater than 10 CR, right? And that is a number for everyone to think.
while these numbers,
That is a number for everyone to think, right? I mean, because our credit card EMI base is only at 6.5 crores, whereas BNPL pre-approved base is already exceeded uh, 10 crores, right? So BNPL is definitely a product which is waiting for adoption by different players. Hey, Gaurav.
hi, sorry, I think some network issue.
No problem. So you were touching upon the bank versus fintechs, talking about how BNPL is growing. One of the key questions that remains in our mind, Gaurav, is what is in it for the key entities in the ecosystem, right? So if I look at the key players, one would be the customer. So you have briefly touched upon that, right? I mean, a superlative checkout experience. The second would be the issuers like yourself, right? And the third would be the merchants, right? So can you please throw some light on like what are the benefits and why should these players adopt BNPL as a product?
Sure. So, Ritin, as you know, the way BNPL is today, it is targeted at creditworthy users who may be excluded from the formal financing system. These could include young professionals or self-employed customers as well. But if you look at the ecosystem, there are merchants like you mentioned for acceptance, there are users for adoption, and then there are BNPL issuers who are banks and non-banks.
Right.
Let me touch upon what's in it for merchants and users both. Merchants, BNPL helps in getting a larger wallet share of its customers. And some of the key positives that include for them is, of course, convenience of payments. Less friction leads to higher transaction success rates. Also, user can make single payment instead of multiple payments. Increased affordability for the user, which leads to a larger upsell prospect for the merchant. Instant availability of credit, credit on discovery, seamless onboarding, and transaction journey at the point of sale with ease.
Okay.
That reminds me of a very interesting data point that only 2% of Indian population. I think I just when I joined back, you were mentioning, there are only about 6.5 crore credit cards in the
Credit
country.
card goes.
Only two
Right.
percent of Indian population has a credit card as compared to
Right.
20% in China.
Right.
Compared to this 20% in China. So I mean, while the size of the economy is comparable, the access to credit continues to be a challenge, which
Absolutely.
is where I think it is going to be a substantial opportunity even for merchants, because not only are they going to add to affordability products, it will give the following benefits almost instantly to them. For users, BNPL is nothing but a cardless credit payment option with a far superior onboarding and transaction experience. And if you honestly ask me, it also adds to the user's ability to park some of these high frequency, small ticket transactions on a different account instead of his card or his bank account. I think currently only 2.1% of global e commerce purchases happen via BNPL. This year is expected to go up to about 4.5% in the next couple of years, according to a report by WorldPay. And like I said before, Europe leads the way in BNPL use with a 7.5% share of total e-commerce purchases. On the other hand, if you look at APAC numbers, they're very, very low at 0.6%. And that's where, as one of the largest economies, we feature.
Right. So if we talk about the overall affordability as a payment method, right? Consumer lending, we have online, which you have spoken about, the e-commerce transactions, global trends, Indian trends, and then we have the in-store, right? So could you also help us understand if we look at online versus offline, right? It's completely different dynamics. Because in online it's more customer-led journey, self-discovery and everything, right? Whereas in offline, in store, it is cashier-led or it is merchant-led, where they drive the experience with the customer. So do you see a difference in terms of adoption in online versus offline as far as BNPL is concerned?
So if you look at the customer lifecycle on BNPL as a product category, there are two stages you would break the user lifecycle in. One is access to credit and onboarding, and the second is the transaction experience. In the online world, because the whole journey is synchronized, the
Right,
user can discover the access to credit, I would say discover the offer, onboard himself, and transact in almost a single session today.
right,
That's where the product has reached already. But if you look at the offline stage, I think access and discovery is still the biggest challenge.
right,
And
right.
I think that's where a lot of banks and non-banks are trying to solve that problem by virtue of building more and more onboarding journeys, discovery and onboarding journeys through different partner platforms in addition to their own channels and their own applications. And I think that is what to some extent will solve. But the
Okay,
fundamental question, Nitin, is not the onboarding. The fundamental question, like you said, today India's pre-approved base on BNPL as a product category is far larger than cards.
absolutely.
Then why is
Right,
it that the user is still not transacting? Why is it that the adoption is still slow?
right,
it only brings you down or narrows down your question to an answer, a single answer, which is awareness, which is
Right,
confidence, which is enablement, which is how much can you talk about, how much can you pose confidence, in the full ecosystem for users
right.
to adopt and merchants to enable, will only help us get to the end point.
Right, right. And one of the interesting questions, which we touched upon earlier was how do you differentiate between a bank versus fintech, right? Because what we've seen is fintechs are generally known to innovate faster. They have uh, some leeway, right, in terms of underwriting customers, right, where they have given a pre-approval to a much larger set of customers, where banks are known to be a little conservative when it comes to underwriting, right? So, how do you see these two entities growing in the ecosystem? Who will have a higher share? And if we could also touch upon some of the technological trends, if I may say, that may lead to the scale up of both these players.
So, you see, I don't see a very, very fundamental difference between the way non-banks and banks operate today.
Okay,
The only difference, see, look at the transaction journeys. They're almost alike. They're almost similar. If you need a frictionless journey at the end of the day, keeping the guardrails, the regulatory guardrails in mind, like two-factor authentication, keeping the security of the user in mind, considering that it's a credit-enabled payment mode, one has to be mindful and be careful of that you are doing the full check on who the user is, who is transacting, is it the borrower, is it someone else. So all of those keeping all of those factors in mind, I think security is something that the whole ecosystem today is enough and more mindful about.
right,
I don't think there's any difference there. The fundamental difference only is how are you underwriting these users to reach it, to take it to a larger audience, to take it to a larger universe. How do you, like I said in the beginning, expand the universe to sort of.
okay. I think network issue. I'm sure Gaurav will be right back. But that was a very interesting session. Um, Thank you very much, all of you, for joining. We'll give it a minute for Gaurav and let us open the door to some questions. Okay. Okay. We have some interesting questions here. So we'll just give it a minute for Gaurav to join back and we can take some of these questions. Yeah. So one of the questions that has interestingly come is what is the role that can be played by aggregators like PayU in the development and adoption and scale of payment products like BNPL in India? I mean, Gaurav has touched upon very relevant insights, which I'm sure will be very relevant to the people watching. Hey, Gaurav, you're back. So, Gaurav, yeah. So we were on the last topics. I think one of the very relevant question that has come from one of our audience is what is the role that payment aggregators like PayU can play in the adoption and scale of products like BNPL?
See, well, I think I have articulated enough on the problems that BNPL as a product is solving for the merchant ecosystem. I believe aggregators like PayU have been instrumental in simplifying quite a few things for the merchants, both in the context of BNPL and other payment solutions. Some of them, to my mind, if I have to articulate, are easier plug and play enablement of solutions at the merchant checkout, uh, rendering customized journeys for enhanced usage of solutions, customized dashboards and analytics for merchants' reconciliation management. So, on one side, all this would lead to distribution at scale at the merchant checkout. Well, on the other side, it would also lead to other benefits for the merchants like faster go to
Right,
market, lesser engineering bandwidth, and effort to not only integrate but also maintain the efficiency and performance of the solution. I think there's a lot of value that payment aggregators like PayU can add here with BNPL issuer banks like us for your tech enability prowess to help your merchant scale. Besides creating awareness as you're already doing currently, and literacy around BNPL product category. I think I would also like to make a mention that at ICICI we've invested in building this plug and play with PayU, and I would
Right.
urge all merchants to test this payment option as we are witnessing great growth in volumes and transaction value.
Interesting. Interesting. One last question, Gaurav, I think we have from Rahul. Can you throw some light on sustainability of core BNPL partners like ICICI, Simple, LazyPay, etc., as the profit margins are negative because of low MDR rates in Indian market?
Well, I
Wow.
am happy to tell you that for banks like ourselves, and I think we were the first one to jump on the bandwagon of BNPL. For a
Right.
bank like ourselves, the it's a profitable portfolio. Well, we don't really boast of it right now because it's not a very large portfolio, and of course, the headroom for us to grow here is substantial. I don't think we've even scratched the surface. Having said that, it's difficult for me to comment for non-banks. I understand and I know very well that from a ROE perspective, they are in negative. And but there could be multiple factors behind it, right? Cost of capital is one of the fundamental factors,
Right.
and the other large factor is also because they don't have visibility to the user's financials today, given the unorganized supply of user
Absolutely.
information.
Yeah.
While as a bank, we would of course have that visibility, and which is why we are able to arrive at a far larger pre-approved base compared to a non-bank partner. Having
Right.
said that, if a non-bank partner decides to move faster, obviously the risk for them is far larger. Uh, but on the flip side, the way we look at it is that there is no collection model today that exists
But they have.
for BNPL as a product because it's a
Right.
small ticket product. And for non-bank partners, one of the fundamental differences that if they were to go behind debt management and collection management, it will become an extremely and an unviable product proposition for them to run as far as the business model is concerned. So I'm not sure if I've really answered your question the way you wanted me to, but I've tried to put the fundamentals of what is important in the whole ecosystem to be able to understand and decipher what's in it for the issuers, the bank partners or the non-bank partners, the merchant
Merchant.
ecosystem, as
Yeah.
well as the users.
Right, got a very interesting insight. I mean, we can clearly see that BNPL is here. It is just beginning. There is a lot of it in store for the customers, for the merchants. And I think I would like to add here, right? Bank and non-bank partners, I think both are necessary for the growth of the entire ecosystem. As you touched upon one of the topic that training and awareness is the biggest problem. Once that is solved, right, eventually we'll see adoption, and that is where I think both entities should come together, and a payment aggregator like PayU can play a very important role in training the merchant ecosystem, and the banks can play the similar role in training the customers. And with time, I think some of these reports, right, we believe that this will be, if not more, at least as much as I talked about payment instrument like UPI, right? So thank you very much, Gaurav. That was very interesting insight today. Thank you very much for joining us here in this fireside chat session.
Thank you, Nitin. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you.